Okay, let's wait 1 or 2 more minutes for people to join.
Have all the minute takers, by the way.
Sorry, was that?
Efficient minute takers.
Yeah, I heard that part, and that's good.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, we are 2 past the hour, so I think we can start. Welcome everybody to this core interim meeting. I am Marco Tiloca, my co-chair is Jaime Jimenez. And this is an official IETF meeting, so the note will apply as usual. We are recording now. Try to find some time to get familiar with this. It's not just IPR, it's also about the code of conduct we follow, so be nice to one another and professional. And that said, the agenda for today is going through the update for a number of documents, some in ISG review and beyond, Then we go into a bit more details for ongoing work and open points for Coral, key update for Oscor and DNS over co-op. And we touch again the topic of a possible rechartering for which you receive some input at the end of the agenda. Any proposed bashing for this agenda? Or anything more to add? No, then we can start with the main document update. And before going into SendML DataCT, we got a few days ago the news that the document was finally approved for publication, eco request tag. That's a great news per se, and also for other documents that are waiting in the queue in cluster 280, I think. So the resource directory and new block for core, but also another document in LWIG. And thanks again, Christian, the authors, and the working group for this. That's very good. That said, we can go to SendML DataCT. And Carsten, you can use the PDF sharing tool. That's right.
Okay, so we now have confirmation that the discussers will be cleared with the next revision. So we have 3 items that essentially come from the comments that we still need to resolve, and then I think we should be done. Well, maybe 1 or 2 little editorial things. So this is really the last round. And if you want to follow this process, of course, this is best done in the repository where you find the merge PRs and occasional editorial fixes. So let me go to the 3 questions. So the first question came up when Ben Keddak reminded us that, by the way, there is a replacement for RFC 7231 out there. And so you shouldn't be using the ABNF from 7231. You should reference the ABS from that replacement, which is in the RFC editor queue in edit state at the moment. Well, it turns out it's different ABNF. And they actually have changed something there after like 20 years. This is the parameters part for the media type definition. In that syntax, the word media type actually stands for a content type and not a media type name, but that's a long story. Anyway, so up to now, it was like below in the RFC 7231 definition, where you had a type, a slash, a subtype, and then 0 or more parameters, each of which is led in by a semicolon. And the new syntax actually allows you to leave off the parameter. So you can have lots of semicolons, like in the example here below. So the example up there is how it should look like, and the example below is what the new syntax allows. Now, this is of course complete garbage, but it's what lots of implementations actually do and accept. So the HTTP people decided they want to have that in their media type syntax. And the question really is, do we have to follow this change, or do we want to have clean media type definitions like they have been in RFC 2616 and 7031 for a couple decades now? Yeah, what's at the low end of the slide never really was sanctioned, but it was out there in the wild. And we don't share the wild, so we are not copy pasting from HTTP headers into SendML attributes, I hope. So does anyone have an opinion on this? So I raised the issue over in the HTTP BIS working group, and of course the advice was you should mirror whatever HTTP does, but I don't agree with that. Any support, disagreement? So
there's a comment from Christian in the chat, yeah, not allowing legacy strings.
Ari?
I agree with Christian here. I mean, I think we shouldn't diverge from HTTP without a good reason, but I think this is a good reason. That's really what they allow. And as you said, like, we don't have that problem. And when we need to go between HTTP, if someone does that on the HTTP side, we can sanitize before we go to SendML side. But we don't have to luckily sanitize the other direction, because it would be correct anyway. So
yeah,
I would go with the original one.
Any other statements? Okay, so let's go to the next example where we actually have been deviating from HTTP and maybe should fix that. HTTP has a construct called quoted string, which you actually can find in the parameter value. A parameter value is either a token or a quoted string. That's why we have to look at the structure of quoted string. So whenever the parameter value is not a simple token, but has some internal structure and maybe has spaces inside itself which are meaningful, or maybe has add signs which might be confused with our content coding specifiers, you will have to put them into a quoted string. And a quoted string in HTTP is defined as a double quote and then 0 or more characters, double quote, where a character is either an actual character here or a quoted pair, which is a backslash and a character. And the quoted pair, of course, allows you to have a wider set of values there. So in the current version of the document, we are deviating from HTTP by only allowing the text characters and not the quoted pair characters. So if we have any media type parameters that actually contain double quotes or backslashes, then we need to allow quoted pairs. And yeah, so my resolution would be not to mirror this slightly bloated syntax from HTTP again. So we leave out HTAB, we leave OBS text. OBS means obsolete. So we leave out the obsolete stuff, but we do put in the quoted pair, and the quoted pair is a backslash followed by a space or any other visible character, which is definition VCHAR is a definition from RFC 5234 from the ABNF standard. So that's a substantive change, but yeah, if we ever have a text backslash, yeah, I agree. I think we need to get this so we don't get surprises when people have quotes and parameters and we don't have a way to represent that. Yes, so these Ari says we have application / COSI semicolon COSI type equals COSI encrypt 0. And if you look at the media type syntax, the COSI dash type is the parameter name, which is a token, and the value of that token is the parameter value, and that is a quoted string. So quoted string is something we can do today with the current syntax. But what we couldn't do is backslash double quote embedded in the COSI type. So if somebody were defining a COSI type that has an embedded double quote, we would have a problem. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I'm not hearing any opposition to actually following HTTP, and as Ari has said, we shouldn't deviate from the substance of HTTP. We only want to deviate from where it has legacy baggage that we don't need. Okay, so I take that as a go ahead. And the third question was that SendML, of course, is not a protocol in the sense that you have two peers talking to each other for a while and then finally agreeing to send SendML along, but it's a data format. So somebody who creates SendML doesn't necessarily know who will actually look at this. And that may not only be a remote system, that may be a system that is 5 years in the future. So it's really hard to negotiate what that system 5 years in the future will be able to support. So in SendML, we normally make sure that we only have fields that essentially must be understood when that's needed. So we have this underscore concept. And here with a media type information, we don't know whether the recipient will know the specific media type used, the parameters used, any content codings used, and finally any content format numbers registered for the first three. So the SendML creator just assumes that the implementation on the other hand knows these things or has a way to acquire that knowledge if needed. And I don't think that is any different from other SendML features. And to me, the important thing is that the recipient implementation knows that it needs to be updated to understand these things. So we are never sending anything where the recipient trips over that and misunderstands it. We clearly say what that is, and if the recipient doesn't know these parameters, then, well, it still can process the SendML record, but it cannot make sense of the actual data in the record, which I think is fine. So this would be essentially an editorial change highlighting this, and then we should be done. Great. So I think I'm done, unless there are any more questions. So the plan is to have a new version of the internet draft a couple of days from now, and then Ben and Murray can clear their discusses, and Francesca can check whether she can press the approve button. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more comments, questions on this, by the way, before we go on? Okay. The next thing would be about the core conf documents, especially Sid and Jan Sibor, for which there was also a design team meeting last week, and one more is planned on Monday next week. Karsten and or Michael, if you want to give an update on the status, that would be great.
Hi. Yeah, so we have all these issues that have been opened, and we had, I can't say his name, Ivaltlo, Andy, German, Karsten, myself, and who was the last one? There was someone else, I think, who joined us on Thursday. That was our second meeting last week. We've given us the week till Monday to do some other things, and then hoping that we'll have the bulk of the work done by then before the draft cutoff date. And if you have any stake in any of the issues, your comments would be most welcome in the GitHub.
Sounds great. Anything you want to add, Karsten?
No, again, I would like to underscore what Mike said, that you should have a look at the GitHub repo. That there's a lot of Brownian motion there in the issues, and we are really understanding things that we should change and should not change. So a lot of things is going on there, but it's all essentially about answering the discuss and comment positions from the ISG.
Right. Thank you. Okay. If there's nothing more on this, we can move on to the next item, which should be Coral. And Christian, you should find version 0 now to share. Let's see if that worked out. Version 1, sorry.
Yeah, let's try. Yeah, I think this looks better now. Okay. So this is a brief status update on what we've been doing in the design team meetings for Coral. I've shown a few things at the previous interim, most of that is now merged. So the information model is described as a graph with that structure on top that that can be used to guide the client and to give some things like sequence in there, even though they are not statements of their own, but they can help the client process things the right way. And forms and embedded payloads are still kind of out of scope for the information model. They are built on top of that. So a form is kind of a step of indirection that might later be optimized in the serialization, but doesn't make the information model any more complicated. There was this big question that I drew a few things about last time on how to handle literals, with the two options being that every literal is a thing of its own and can have its own properties and graph edges going out, as opposed to having the literal value together with any attributes it has as a single entity. Having written a bit about how we can convert well-known link format files and RDF to and from curl, I think that the latter is just easier to handle, and it's probably also easier to explain and to handle in implementations, because you don't have to introduce all the terminology to say that this is a literal, but its identity is kind of it's an entity of its own. It's just easier. So that's what I suggest that the document be moved on to. There's no pull request for that yet, but a few other parts in the text already assume that. So if you have a strong opinion that this should go in the other direction, please let me know. Please let's discuss this here, because otherwise things will start to depend on this. New things since we last spoke. The text now explains that packed CBOR is actually used. Previously, we've talked about this in interims and design meetings, but not really nailed it down. And also the text format was replaced with a diagnostic notation that Carsten presented recently in the CBOR interims, where the CRIs now can be expressed using CBOR diagnostic notation without the need to make things kind of in a more native way, so that the CBOR diagnostic notation of the actual curl file expressed in CBOR becomes really human readable, at least to the point where we can do all our examples with it and go on from there. Also new since the last interim is that there is now a described mapping from link format and between curl and RDF. I won't talk much about the RDF, but the link format I'd like to show later on a later slide. And there's a quite important limitation on it. That is that link format, or web links in general, can express a whole lot of things. And if we tried to pull that all in, not only would curl be much more complicated than it can be, but also it will be a lot less usable, or less useful, because when you get information from a curl file, from a link, that, at least as far as the semantics of the links, as the links in general are concerned, doesn't tell you whether you can use that information in any other context, whereas curl should convey valid information to a device that will later act on it. So that means that we can't just define a conversion from link format to curl and say that these are equivalent, because they might not be. There are unregistered attributes in link format and all kinds of things that that if we defined an equivalence, we might break existing applications. I don't know of such applications, but web links in the very general sense, like as they're used in HTTP link headers, etc., are used in ways that are not compatible with this, which is why there is a sentence at the start of this conversion that says, if you're doing things like we do here, then this works for you, but it's opt-in per application. And if you're doing things differently, then you might need to extend this conversion or just create your own. To give an example of the easy parts, the parts as we use them here, this example from RC 6690 is converted down here to Coral in the diagnostic notation. So the sensors thing, there's a link from the root with the implicit host relations to the sensors. And these sensors have a content type and a title. And here come in all the parts where the conversion really takes a stance on properties that we demand. So content type is really a numeric thing and can't just happen to be a string also because the syntax isn't nailing it down. Interfaces are split up by white space, as 6690 describes it, into semantic relations that are usable all on their own. If you want to know more, ask me later or look into the current editor's copy, which we plan to upload before the cutoff as a -04. There are a few open questions that are currently being worked on, and I've picked 4 out of these. One is that we currently describe that Coral files must be in deterministic encoding. I think this is a leftover from when Coral and CRIs were one thing, so this can probably go out. I mentioned before the model of literals that I'd like to nail down. One thing that it didn't even come up yet in the design team meetings was that we might manage to do some simplification if we disallow that a node talks about another, that talks about another, that talks about that original node, which is so far okay, and then fans out. So if we can rule this out, I think that there's some simplification to be gained. And the last topic is on the question of whether what we're describing as an open world or a closed world model, that is, can you deduce something from the absence of statements that this is not that statement is not true because it's neither stated nor implied by any of the other statements? I don't think that we need to fix this for all use cases of Coral, but I do think that we should give a bit of guidance to users of Coral, because a common use pattern that I expect is that documents are transferred and then the user asks certain things of that document and gets a subset of that document to avoid transferring data that the user is not interested in. And there are a few precautions that designers of applications or of languages built on Coral should need to observe in order to stay usable in such an open world model. So thanks, that's it from my side. Questions, comments? Nothing on the chat so far. Anything I should go back to? Examples of the CBOR diagnostic format versus the original text format. I don't have any at hand. I can probably pick them out of the history. One thing I'd like to point out there is that for many use cases, it might be so. The original text format is definitely easier to read compared to the diagnostic notation. One reason this went out is not so much the readability topic, but where was this? Here. But also the topic of what idea does this give the user? So all the examples that we had of the text notation introduced these basically directives that said we have this prefix now and this prefix now, and these have no corresponding element in the binary notation. So it's like if you were explaining co-op transfers in terms of HTTP transfers, and then people get all the wrong impressions that there are strings transferred where they are actually not. So this is one reason where this went out, and also one reason why this looks a lot different here.
Thank you. Any more comment, input for Christian? Just Ari acknowledging. So I've known this will continue also in a design team meeting later this week. Thank you, Dan. And the next item we have, then, and we save some time, is a key update for Oscor. And that's Ricard.
Yes, hello, let me share the slides or ask to share. Yeah, selecting the correct ones.
There you go.
Yes, perfect. Right, so I would like to present some updates that have happened on these drafts about key updates for Oscor. We're now moving towards version 02 of this document, which we will submit before the cutoff date for the next meeting. And I see the slides look a bit blurry, by the way, but hope it's fine. Just a recap first. So basically, this draft covers it has two main parts, let's say. The first part about is the fact that since Oscor uses AAD algorithms to provide security, it needs to follow certain limits in terms of key usage and number of failed decryptions before you must perform a rekeying. And this is also described in this and discussed in this C4G draft that I provided as a reference there in the slides. And the key point here is that if you don't follow these limits, it may be possible for an adversary to break the security properties of the AAD algorithm. So the two main parts of this document are first, the study of these limits and their impact on OS core, which means defining appropriate limits for OS core, defining counters for how many times you have used a key, message processing details, like when you should increment a counter, for instance, and also steps to take when these limits are reached, like methods for rekeying. And we have also updated our original approach, taking into account feedback from John Mattsson that he gave at one of the previous core interim meetings. And the second part, main part, is defining a new method for rekeying OS core. And this is a method that's inspired by the current Appendix B2 of OS core. And the goal is that you want to generate a new master secret and new master salt, and thus you will get new sender and recipient keys, meaning fresh keys to use. And in the context of the limits, if you rekey, you can reset these counters back to 0. And this method we propose also achieves perfect forward secrecy. So going into a bit into the key limits part, just as a recap what this is about. So again, it's discussed in this C4G draft. And the key point is that you must limit the amount of times you use a key for encryption, and also how many times you use a key when decryption fails. And basically what we have done in this document is we have selected fixed values for Q, V, and L. So yeah, Q is the encryption usage, how many times you've used the key for encryption. V is how many times decryption has failed, and L is the message size in cipher blocks. And from these fixed values, we have calculated these IA and CA probabilities, which is basically the probability of breaking integrity properties and the probability of breaking confidentiality properties. And depending on the selected Q, V, and L, you of course achieve different values for IA and CA. But the key point here is that these probabilities must be acceptably low. So you have to choose appropriate input values to achieve good output probabilities. And we have documented this in the draft with multiple examples. And then I go into a bit of updates, what has changed now since the last, what we've been doing in terms of updates to the document. So the first point we added was saying that you have to explicitly limit the size of protected data to be sent in a new OS core message, because if you, depending on the L value you set, the probabilities will be influenced. So that means that whatever L you have selected, the implementation should not exceed the L value, meaning they have to limit how big messages they send. So the text we have added now says basically that the total size of the cozy plain text, authentication tag, and possible cipher padding for a message may not exceed the block size for the selected algorithm multiplied with L. So your constraint is L times the block size for the algorithm, and you don't want the causal plain text authentication tag and cipher padding to exceed this size, because then you're essentially not following that L value. You're going higher than you should. And of course, if the message turns out to be too big and you want to send a really big message, well, you can split it with blockwise, and then it's multiple small messages. So that's a workaround you could choose. But the open question here is that if this limitation and the way we have phrased it in the text, if that makes sense. Yeah, we can please jump in at any time with comments. I will continue. Yeah, so another...
Sorry to interrupt. Christian perhaps wanted to say something.
Oh, of course, please.
Christian?
Hello?
Yes,
Hello?
we can hear you now.
It would be a bit easier if the values of length were given in terms of actual byte size values, because I don't know all the block sizes off my head. So when you come back later to examples of L, maybe you could give this in bytes too. Thanks.
I see. Yeah, right. We could definitely possibly extend the tables we have currently with that. The way we did it now with L is because all the formulas are defined in terms of L, and that's the symbol they use in the formulas from the CFRD document. But yes, it may be useful for like readability to also have the size in bytes. So one update we did here was we actually increased the selected L value we had for all algorithms except AES 128 CCM8 from 2 to the power of 8 to 2 to the power of 10, because we realized that we still maintain acceptable CA and IA probabilities, even increasing the L value. So basically increasing the L value means that you get higher probabilities. But we still see that with 2 to the power of 10, these are acceptable. And basically the point there is that in the CFRD document, they mention that you may want to aim for CA and IA lower than 2 to the power of minus 50. So that's the limit they set there. And as you can see in this table here, even with increasing L, we still are well much better than 2 to the power of minus 50 in terms of our probabilities. So in fact, question here and something we should explore, I think, is if there's a possibility to increase QVNL even further, since we are well below this 2 to the power of minus 50 number that's mentioned in the CFRD document currently. And by the way, we handle AES 128 CCM8 as a different case, because that's the most that's the one that you may end up with probabilities that are quite high. Like it's you have to analyze that separately. So I will go to the next slide. And here you can see an analysis of AES 128 CCM8, where we have added some more values in the current table we had. We added a new value for V, while still, so you can see we added V to the power of 14 here on the left side. And with that, we really hit IA probability 2 to the power of minus 50. And the CA is better than that. So that's not a problem. So in fact, we could here increase, this could be like a recommended good set of values for implementers to use, while still hitting this 2 to the power minus 50 probabilities. Well, an open question here is like, as they say in the CFRD document, you can aim for 2 to the power minus 50 for CA and IA, but the open question is if it's ideal to stick to these 2 to the power minus 50 as close as possible, or if there is fine with some slight deviation. I go to the next one. So then we come into the key update part. And again, I'm sorry if the slides look blurry. For me, they look, the figure is a bit blurry, unfortunately. So we defined, this is just a recap, by the way. So the second part of this draft is we defined a new method for rekeying Oscor. Again, loosely based on the Appendix B2 current method that's in the Oscor RFC. And essentially, the client and server exchange two nonces, R1 and R2. And we have this update CTX function that takes the nonces as input, and from that derives a new security context. And you basically go from your current security context to an intermediate context, and then you end up with your new context. So it's like a message exchange. After one request and one response, you have your new context established, and then from the second request, you can start using it. And here on the right, you see the client-initiated version. And here I list a number of beneficial properties. So it's robust and secure against rebooting. It's only one round trip. After that, you can use the new context. It's compatible with establishment of a context with the ad hoc protocol. So you can actually use the ad hoc exporter if your original context was established to ad hoc. You only have one intermediate security context derived. And the ID context does not change throughout this procedure. And it can be initiated by either the client or the server. Yeah, and one update we have done now is that we have removed the R1 value in the response in the client-initiated rekeying. So this is just like it's in Appendix B2 of Oscor. Basically, you don't need R1 in the response from the server because you can already correlate the response one and request one through the co-op token. So it's really kind of redundant here to also include R1 in the response. Another update we did was to clarify the request processing for request 2 on the server initiated rekeying. And this is again taking inspiration from Oscor Appendix B2. And you can basically, it's kind of a checking stage here that you see that, okay, this R1 was sent in a previous response one, and that the R1, R2 concatenated together has never been received in a request 2. And by the way, we should also add here, and we will add further text on this generation storage of R2 that can be similar again to Oscor Appendix B2, which already has some similar text on that topic. Further updates. So we added recommendations on the minimum length of R1 and R2. And again, R1 and R1 concatenated with R2 are used as nonces. And we motivate this based on similar considerations as in Appendix B2. And currently we recommend the minimum 8 bytes for R1 and R2. And yeah, a question here is if this is sufficient. I see Christian's raising his hand.
Yeah, basically asking a similar question as we've had in Echo Request Tag. Recommending a minimum of 8 bytes might be good, but we should take care that devices that can work on an incrementing schedule also can do that, so that they can keep it short if they can be sure that it will not be reused.
Yeah, that may be a good point, that we shouldn't lock out maybe more embedded implementations if they can do this in a safe way. Yeah. Yes. So also, yes, further text needs to be added about like collisions and the birthday paradox, etc. So we will expand the current text a bit with some considerations. Another point we have now is that we realized you have to terminate ongoing observations after a rekeying, because it's fundamentally not secure due to, among other things, exactly which data is part of the external AD. But we do have a possible way here that you can actually keep observations if you wish. And that is that after a rekeying, the client should look at all ongoing observations and select the highest partial IV. And when the client then wants to start a new observation, it should jump its sender sequence number up to the highest partial IV for ongoing observations +1, so that there can be no risk of colliding partial IVs for any observations. So thus every new observation will have a request, have a partial IV higher than partial IV asterisk. And so the drawback here is that you have big jumps in the partial IV, which means faster consumption of the partial IVs and also larger communication overhead because you are sending more data as they are bigger in the messages themselves. So the question here is like, is it worth to keep observations ongoing across the rekeying, considering the drawbacks it would lead to? So I go to the next slide, just going through this quickly. So we aligned the edhoc exporter interface as it has been updated in edhoc version 11. And we also say now that a peer using edhoc and this Oscor rekeying procedure must support edhoc key update, while the edhoc draft says it should support it. And the reason we say you must support it is because the update function that generates new master secret and new master salt and a new context uses this edhoc key update. So you basically must support it to use it if your original context was established with edhoc. Yeah, and there's a question here is if this is an okay solution. I go to the next step. Yeah, we added 6-dish as a use case for this procedure because currently 6-dish uses Appendix B2 to handle failure events. And basically 6-dish, the JRC can use Appendix B2 with the pledges. And this new key update procedure can be a nice replacement for Appendix B2, especially for 6-dish, because one good property here is that it preserves the ID context across rekeying. And if the ID context changes, the JRC needs to do some kind of remapping between the new ID context and the pledge identifier, since 6-dish is using the ID context as a pledge identifier. So here it's one advantage of our Appendix B2 basically in this new procedure. And we also say now that this draft will update RFC 8613, also deprecating and replacing Appendix B2. So it will essentially become the new Appendix B2. And so two questions here. Is it okay to supersede those core Appendix B2 procedure? And secondly, is the wording we chose okay, which is deprecating and replacing? Yeah, then a bit more general updates. So we improved the table of contents. Now it looks like this. So you have key limits, the current rekeying methods, where we'll go over a number of existing rekeying methods. Then we have the new rekeying methods, the building blocks, and we have two versions like the client-initiated procedure and the server-initiated procedure. Then some policies that applications may take advantage of or configure how they want to. And then a discussion section. We also did some editorial improvements, harmonizing the terminology, and we also used the terminology for IANA considerations from RFC 8126. And one open question here is, should we select a name for this rekeying procedure? So it could have like a short name that's easy to refer to. So like, for instance, now in Oscor, you can call it Appendix B2 procedure, but it's a bit, for this new one, it could possibly be nice to have an easily said and referable name. And then a couple of open points and next steps. So one thing we want to do, of course, is address open points. We're actually tracking a number of issues. I think we collected all the issues that we have on the GitLab repo, and that's of course open for anyone to visit and take a look at. And we also want to further refine these limits and update the tables, possibly to change the selected QVNL values we have to fine-tune it to come closer to this 2 to the power of minus 50 suggested limit that the CFRD document brings up. And of course, we will take care of any comments received during meetings or in the mailing list. And again, yeah, we intend to submit a new draft version before the IETF 112 cutoff. That will be version 2 we submit. Yes, I see Christian's raising his hand.
Yeah, brief comment on the topic of which L can we pick. Now that I've compared it with the block sizes, as with everything that we have now, it probably doesn't matter so much, because currently we don't have BERT. So if there is in a BERT for Oscor, so if there is in a blockwising, then the messages are limited to 1 kilobyte anyway. And if there is out of blockwising, then the alternative to chunking it in 1 kilobyte blocks is sending the whole representation, which might easily exceed any L that is feasible. So that takes a bit of pressure, I think, out of the L discussion, unless we really want to use BERT for Oscor.
Right. We actually have an open issue, I think, tracking this point about wanting really large L values. But I think I agree with you that since saying typically in blockwise, I mean, I think like an L of 2 to the power of 10, as you said, you will be using inner blockwise as a client sending request. So I think we may very well be fine in terms of the L limit. Maybe more interesting to look at increasing. Possibly we could increase Q, I believe, because we have a good margin when it comes to the CA probability, and Q and V affect these probabilities in different ways due to how the formulas are structured. But yes, thank you for the input. Yeah, so I think that was about it. It was just a thank you, and if anyone has any comments or questions, and here you can also see the link to the GitLab repository, where you can find the latest version and also all the open issues.
And just relaying comments from the chat, it seems that at least Christian and Karsten would like to have a name associated to this.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah. Then we can consider we consider like an internal name we had was this QDOS, which is KUDOS. So we can thanks for the feedback.
Thank you. Any more questions for Richard? If no, then let's continue with DNS over co-op. And I think Martina would like to share. Oh, the PDF. Okay.
This first time here.
It is still uploading.
Ah, okay. It is uploading. I didn't select anything to upload. That's interesting. But okay, there it is. Let's see if that works. Yes. No.
Oh, you just selected a previous presentation again.
Oh, sorry.
No problem.
Yeah,
the procedure is correct.
Okay. Now I only need to. Ah, here. Okay, great.
Good. Thanks.
Okay, I seem to have a similar problem as the other presenters, that it's somewhat low res, but I guess we can manage with that. So yeah, I'm Martin Lenders. I'd like to talk about our draft about DNS queries over co-op. And yeah, if you want to read it, I provided the name of it, of course, and we decided to do the discussion for now on GitHub. You can find the link also on the slides. So let's first talk about why we think we need it. As you probably know, DNS isn't encrypted, so anyone who requests a name from an IoT device to a DNS server runs the risk that they will be eavesdropped. And so when using an encrypted transport with co-op, we can encrypt it, similar as it is done with DNS over HTTP or DNS over TLS. But these two protocols, of course, conflict with the constraint use case. And an additional advantage when we, for example, look at DNS over DTLS is that we can share the same system resources that we use for co-op, if you have a co-op client on the node, to then also use for DNS. So the same sockets, the same buffer can be used, and we can also reuse the co-op retransmission mechanism. To give you a basic overview is basically that we encapsulate the DNS queries in a co-op request. Those then, of course, can, by a DNS over co-op server, be relegated to another DNS server and then get our DNS response back and then encapsulate the co-op response in a DNS response. So really basic at the moment. And the message formats are as basic as basically also the same as we have in DNS over HTTP. So we said that the message should be in a co-op confirmable message, so we can reuse the retransmission mechanism. And we have three message types defined: GET, where we encode the DNS query in a base URL format and put it in a URI query parameter. Then POST, where we put it in the co-op body and have defined a new content format, which is equivalent to the content type application DNS message. And then we also use, which is different from DNS over HTTPS, the fetch method, which is, of course, special to co-op, which we don't have in HTTP. And the DNS response is then basically that the response is in the body of the co-op message, and also in the application DNS message format, and that DNS layer errors that are in the DNS messages should still be signified as a response, and only if there is a co-op layer error, it should be an error. I would prefer if the questions are after the talk, if that's okay. Or unless there is something that is okay. To come to the things we want to discuss here, I already on the mailing list pointed out two issues which I want to summarize quickly here. The first one is that we have in the cache timings, or the timings and information is valid, have relative time controls, and so in DNS it's a TTL, and in co-op it's a max age option, and that leads to the time frames that TTL is that the TTL is cached for in the cache, basically to run out to be maybe out of date. So that would be basically how DOH is doing, is that we just use the minimum TTL in the DNS request as the value for the max age option. But yeah, as I said, that would then quickly go out of sync. Another option that was proposed is that we adopt the max age option to the TTL, or vice versa, and then the clients can calculate the TTL based on the max age option. And the other proposal that I don't think anyone is really happy with is to provide a new option for caching, which would be the H option, which would be similar to what HTTP is doing. And the other issue we'd like to discuss is if we really need all the three methods. If you look at the table on top of my slides, you basically see that both get and post, which are the methods that were used in the original DOH, both have disadvantages because post is not cacheable, And with get, because the query is in the URI, it is not blockwise transferable. And also we need the special URI template to have some, to define where the query actually is in the URI. And we all don't have all these disadvantages with fetch. Yeah, the current state is that if we get rid of, especially Git, we don't need some way to exchange the Euro template, which is done with like the way it's done in DOH, but we can just have the DNS URI in the or link in the core RD. But the problem is, at least with what some co-authors said, is that it's not widely deployed, and so there might be some wild implementation when there is no fetch implementation. When using get or post that used get or post then might pop up. But yeah, for that we propose basically also already a compromise. In the appendix that this pull request is linking to, where basically there is a define of for get and post in the appendix. But the thing is, maybe this isn't that much of a problem, because we actually looked at the implementations of fetch in all in 15 active FOSS implementations, which means active is that it's that the last change was less than a year ago, and there most of them already support fetch. And then also, as Carsten pointed out on the mailing list, fetch is nearly trivial to implement. If you want to have a full overview over that list, there is also this gist of mine, which you can look at. And yeah, so I basically summarize the questions we have for the core group. First of all, if this topic is relevant at all for core in any way, and yeah, the two questions I went into detail for, which was the how to handle the relative aging and caching, and if get or post should be abandoned in doc completely or partly, or only mentions in the appendix, or yeah. And maybe there are further questions that other people have.
Thank you, Martine. Karsten, go ahead again.
Yeah, so of course I had the observation that offering three different ways of doing things really is not the way we should be doing things here, in particular given this URI template stuff and so on. I strongly believe that given that we have had fetch for half a decade now, we might want to use it. And if every single application protocol does not use fetch because there is that single legacy implementation that still doesn't do fetch, then of course nobody will do fetch because you don't need it. So we should simply do the right thing to do here. We know we want this to be cacheable. We know we don't want to do URI encoding of our request messages. So fetch is exactly what the doctor ordered.
So yeah, as you see by my argumentation, I mostly agree with you, but yeah, and yeah, I guess maybe some other people can say also something on that.
Karsten, just to clarify, you'd answer yes to question number 3, right?
The answer is not yes, but completely.
Okay.
Completely yes. Okay.
So the other question.
Christian too, on the chat.
Yeah.
Okay. Karsten, you were trying to say something?
Yes. So the other thing I wanted to bring up was whether you have looked at DNS update. Is that something that should be discussed in this general vicinity, or is it unrelated enough that we should do this later?
I'm not quite sure what you are referring to as DNS update. Could you maybe?
Well, a lot of environments have the ability for a DNS client to actually push information to the DNS server. That's called DNS update.
Okay.
And that, of course, requires some form of authorization and therefore authentication. But given that we already want to have some form of protection for privacy here, that's maybe not such a big cost to pay. So it may be relatively easy to add DNS update function to this protocol.
Yeah, I guess so. It sounds, at least if there's an authentication mechanism, sounds pretty doable. And I guess this can be also implemented with the authentication methods that are already proposed in this group. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not a DNS update specialist, so maybe we should find somebody from the DNS space. Yeah, Michael, that's a good comment. This should happen in DNSOP with review from core. So I think that there is a protocol component that we should put in, and there is an operational considerations component that probably should be done in DNSOP.
Okay.
But the whole thing rests on making things really simple for the clients, which is one reason I only want to have one version of the protocol. But if DNS update is a useful operation, and I'm sometimes hearing DNSSD people opine that way, then maybe we should discuss it here as well.
Yeah. So, but for that, wouldn't then be post required for that? Just to be clarify.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay.
So this is to a large part also simply document creation kind of thing. I mean, at some point we want to have DNS update. Is that something we want to put right into the first bucket, or do we open a second bucket for it? That has a lot to do with what kinds of experts do we have available at a particular point in time. So that's not really a technical decision. It's really a lot of decision about how we just want to proceed to progress this efficiently.
Yeah. Okay. There is some discussion happening in the chat.
Michael, feel free to bring the comments to the mic.
Yeah. So
I guess I think it's going to be really, I think it's going to be really bizarre for the DNS people to understand why we're not just doing DNS over QUIC or DNS or UDP. And I haven't read the document. I didn't know it was on the agenda till now. But so I think that scoping of why isn't there an existing solution that works, I think is probably what is the impedance mismatch we're going to see from DNS op, and that's why I think it's pretty important to get that out of the way early.
Okay.
Plus one.
Okay, any more comments for Martina?
Well, I would like to ask my usual timeline question. So what is the our expectation of how we are going to progress this?
Was it a question again for me or the group? Sorry.
Well, do you expect a resubmission before the cutoff to start?
I think maybe we can, if we decide that that get and post should go out, maybe we can do a resubmission for that. But yeah, I guess regarding the timeline, we were planning to have this topic basically done as soon as possible. So yeah, we don't want to spend years on this. We maybe only in the time frame of months. Matthias wants to say something.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, yeah, as Martin said, we want to get it done soonish. In particular, we have an implementation available in Riot, and we are currently evaluating it and comparing it with other solutions. And second, I mean, what would be the expectation of a updated draft? Would it be that we clarify why DNS over corp is needed compared to DNS over DTLS, for example? Because I mean, DNS over UDP, it's Martin said why we don't want to use it because it's not encrypted. So if at all, it would be DNS over DTLS. Is the expectation that an updated version includes this type of discussion? Silence.
Well, if you ask me, it would be good to spend a couple of sentences on it, and Martin already did that during the discussion today. So I don't think you have to write something epic about it.
No.
Just the way DOH makes sense, because you can go right away, use proxies, and have all the infrastructure of the protocol available. There is a good reason to do DOC.
Okay, yeah, I mean, having this clarified in the draft, it's definitely before the cutoff date possible. I mean, no issue at all.
I think I really would like to have something like a minimum viable protocol here, so we can show to the DNS people, and they don't have to slog through lots of variants and design decisions still to be taken. But actually get a simple, neat, crispy, concise specification, so we can demonstrate that we know what we are doing here, and they can think about operational considerations on that specific proposal.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, if there is here consensus that we should get rid of the get and post, then I mean, we can in the updated version also slim it down to the fetch fetch option. That's not an issue.
Great.
Yeah, people looked in favor to use fetch anyway before.
Okay. Yeah. Fine. I mean, we just wanted to have it for completeness reason to be documented in the first versions, but happy to change.
Right.
And just to clarify, is that with just the get and post removed, or should we still have some fallback in the appendix left?
No appendix, no confusion.
Okay. Okay. Then yeah, we will do that.
Matthias, you're still in the queue. You want to say something?
Oh, sorry. Just lack of clicking. Sorry.
No problem. Okay. If there's nothing else on this, thank you, Martine, for the presentation. Looking forward for the update.
You're welcome.
One comment in the chat. Matthias, welcome. Thank you. Okay, we have one last point in the agenda for today. That's the possibility of rechartering, building on some text proposed a few weeks ago. And we actually received some input from Joran today, off list, on the initiative itself and on possibly better text to consider as a starting point.
Right. Yeah, Joran here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I actually looked at the charter, read it, and it's kind of long. So I don't want to take a stand. I think the rechartering idea is actually a good one. If you read it, you realize that there are things that are out of date, and that's something that might come back to us. So I think the chartering is actually good, rechartering. And so what I did was basically I tried to cut out some text there. Maybe I could try to share the screen, see if it works.
Please.
Okay, can you see my screen? It's not intended to read this, but just can you see the screen?
It's still loading.
Still loading, okay. Okay, so while it's loading, assuming it's still loading, I'm start talking. So basically, I did this very old-fashioned. Can you see it?
No, you probably haven't finished actually.
Looks like a firewall issue.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You're sending 0 kilobits per second.
Let me try again. Wrong. Yes, you're absolutely correct. So I didn't allow this to be read. Now, maybe now it's possible for you to read it.
You lost the privilege to share. You have to ask again.
Okay, sorry for that. Let me try again.
Yeah.
So now I have selecting the right screen, allowing the screen to be viewed.
No, it's gone already.
We lost you again.
You lost me again. Okay,
Yes.
so
yeah,
I
you probably need to go into 5G to do presentations like this and leave the Ericsson firewall.
I'm not in the Ericsson firewall, I'm afraid.
Oh, okay.
So
we need a different culprit this time.
Yeah, but let me then just verbally explain what I tried to do. So, I mean, if you look at it's like a 3-page charter, and what you can do is that the first third of the charter is like the old charter. It's talking about constrained devices and proxies and caching and so on, and that seems very, very much valid and not I mean up to date. And then there are 2 pages which is describing more detailed what the work is going on. And I think that what we could do is to keep the first third, and I have a concrete proposal for that, and then to basically go either just on a high level, what are the topics, or just a bullet for each of the topics. So what I did was just take the actual text and remove parts without going into editing the actual content, just removing stuff. And that still left something like 2.5 pages, but the second and third pages are essentially bullets. So that's it's nothing you can read now, but that's something that I think could be considered if we're going to simplify the charter. And that was my input.
Right. We need to have this shared somehow, also for other people to see and contribute. So probably the easiest way is using the same HackMD where the original first proposal was loaded. And well, you have the link in the minutes, but I can put it in the chat again. So you can just draw a line on top and copy paste your
So did
text.
you want to share the Word document? I could do that.
Can you do that?
Yes.
Okay.
Just take
Thanks,
me a
Karsten.
couple of seconds.
Sure.
Because I don't normally run Word.
Yes, and we have that on G2, so we can also, of course, have one more comment on the repo. Just looking for...
So can you give me the screen?
Yes, sure. It's also loading.
No, it. I'm just trying to find Word which somehow buries itself in the Windows stack. Give me a second.
No problem.
Something is broken about Word which makes sure it never shows up in the right place.
So why did I use Word? Yeah, I use this to change tracks. That's why, which I could have done in a different way, of course.
It. No, finally. So
Right.
I probably
Okay.
should configure something here, but it's good enough.
That's good enough. Yeah. So this is essentially the original text from the current charter, and if you just go down a little bit more, and to the next page. Right, stop. And then we have something here. Stop. Yeah, exactly. So, and then it comes basically the discussion about candidate work items. And then I replaced them with bullets. And that's it. So the black text is the original text, which is current in the charter, and the red text is what I've added. So most things are just the an optimized version of the current charter.
Yeah, it's
Do we have
actual
a better
compression.
word than candidate?
Yes, go ahead. I mean, I did this today, so I've not spent much time.
I'm just wondering. Some of these we actually work on, right? So they are
Somewhat.
not longer. So we
Yes.
are working on group communication, for instance. So it's not a
Some
candidate.
is already work in progress.
Yeah.
All right. Yes, I agree.
So maybe we can just say something like work items may include, and then we have the list. And
fair enough.
Yeah.
I think the main problem is that this kind of exposes very visibly how much stuff we have on our plate.
Right, and that's, this bullet, as I said, this is this first attempt to slim down. This bullet list can be trimmed further. The entire text can be trimmed down much more than this, but as a starting point, maybe this could be used.
We have Francesca in the queue.
Yeah, so thank you, Göran. And
can you speak up?
Oh, can you not hear me?
Much better.
This is strange. Okay. Thank you for bringing this up again and taking a first look, and also for the feedback about yes, you believe the rechartering is a good effort, and I am still looking for the working group's opinion about this should be done or this should not be done. And Karsten, you have voiced your opinion previously that we need to be careful if we do any type of rechartering, and I'm still I don't know if your view has changed about we should do this or not. I guess it depends on what the possible charter or work charter will look like at the end of our effort. But yes, if anybody else has opinions, bring them up, and I'm listening.
Yeah, I hope we can see more opinions coming as we get close to a better text. And this seems to me a good step forward.
Yep.
But yeah, we need more input and opinions.
Yeah, I sure would like to make a pull request on this. But to answer Francesca, yeah, as I said, there is a danger that people wake up to the size of our plate. Maybe that danger is somewhat mitigated by the fact that we do have the old charter, So the worst that can happen is that we don't manage to recharter. And the question really is, what is endangered if we don't manage to recharter?
Yeah, I wonder that too, because if we do bring this to the ISG and tell them, yeah, the core charter is somewhat outdated, and we might need to do this, and then we don't manage to get the rechartering done for some reason. I think that what could happen is that the ISG becomes even more attentive to the drafts that are brought to them, and they'll be like, okay, this is not in scope of the charter, and it's going to be harder to motivate. It's at the limit of the charter, and like at that point we will have if we do bring this rechartering to the ISG, we will have in some sense agreed as a working group that some of the work is at the limit of the working group scope. So that's the danger, in my opinion.
Jaime.
Audio okay?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of a strange situation because I think everybody wants to achieve the same goal, which is to facilitate the new work. But I think like it's kind of like besides the point, because what we really need is group participation for it to move forward. And I think that should be the main focus. I mean, people should start thinking about the issue and comment on it so that anything that can happen actually happens.
Yes. So we already have a thread on the list about this. Joran, is it fine to have this text in the ACMD and on GitHub?
Yes, fine.
Okay.
Copy if you can, otherwise I'll do it.
I can do that. And so at least we continue on the same venues, and people are welcome to comment and provide text there. But thank you very much for this first round.
Yeah, I mean, the purpose of this exercise was just to see that this is a subset, more or less a subset of what is in the charter today, and there's a lot of words taken out. That's it.
I feel like, sorry, Karsten. I feel like most people need to take a closer look at the current charter to maybe form an opinion about if rechartering is needed or not. And I hope that more people take a look and express their opinion.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, if it's in GitHub, then I can edit it.
Sure. Okay, we'll upload this last version.
Put it into a branch, then it's nicely hidden, and
right.
I can PR to that branch.
Okay. Anything else on this topic in particular, or on any other topic for today? Okay, then we can close the meeting 1 minute earlier. Thank you very much for today and your work.
Thank you all.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.